Welcome to Sunday Sermons from the Williamsburg Community Chapel, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. Let's grab our Bibles and open up to the book of 2 Kings, chapter 24, verses 8 through 20. And I'll read verses 12 through 14 for us now, as we prepare to hear from lead pastor Travis Simone as he introduces our new annual focus titled Exile. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign and carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon, king of Israel, had made, as the Lord had foretold. He carried away all Jerusalem and all the officials and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and all the smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land.
Christmas morning at the Simone house looks like two things. We open the presents, and then we gather around the dining room table for a Christmas breakfast. If you've been at the chapel for any amount of time, you know which element I prefer. If you're new, welcome. This pastor loves to eat. And so we open the presents and then we sit down around the dining room table for a great Christmas breakfast, and we laugh and we tell stories and we read Christmas letters that our friends have sent to us. A couple Christmases ago, we are sitting around the breakfast table, the presents in the past, and I realized I forgot one present. I got a present at Thanksgiving time and I hid it away, and I forgot to give it to my youngest daughter, Ruthie. And so I announced something very jarring at the Christmas breakfast table. I said, I have a bonus present. The kids all looked around. Who's the bonus present for? I said, I have a bonus present for Ruthie. Ruthie is the youngest. Sophia, the oldest, says, Ruthie's bonus presents, story of my life. I want to tell you this morning the story of all our lives. The year is 598 BC, and the international superpower Babylon attacks Jerusalem. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city while his servants were besieging it. The city is surrounded. Rather than risk an all-out war, the king surrenders. By cooperating, he thinks, maybe I can save some of my family. Maybe I can save some in my community. Maybe I can save some sliver of the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet no mercy is shown. The entire royal family is rounded up. The temple of Solomon is raided. Objects, both sacred and beautiful, are treated like nothing more than scrap metal. The army, too, is rounded up, along with the professional class: craftsmen, merchants, landlords, farmers, bakers, really anyone and everyone required for a functional society and a flourishing culture. A puppet king is installed, and the key detail in verse 20 is his name is changed. This was to serve as a permanent reminder of what happens to those who mess with Babylon. Their identity gets snuffed out. Who they were, who they are, and who they will be is now the business of Babylon. Let me just give you a 4-part summary. The military is defeated. The economy is decimated. Religious worship is desecrated, and the government is dissolved. Notice how the losses pile up one on top of the other. Just look at verse 12 with me. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself and his mother and his servants and his officials and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign. That last phrase, after it shows loss after loss after loss, that last phrase, the 8th year of the king of Babylon's reign, is quite important. We're down to the last 2 chapters of the story of the kings of Israel. And all throughout 1 Kings, all throughout 2 Kings, time is dated according to the reign of the kings of Israel. And what happens in verse 12? Time is now dated according to the reign of the king of Babylon. Your history is over. Welcome to Babylon. This is the story of exile. Many of us in the church have not heard the story of exile. Many of us live our lives to avoid the story of exile. Again, if you're new or visiting, this is the kind of church that loves to dig into the whole story of the Bible, even the uncomfortable parts. This is the story of exile. And if this point has not been abundantly clear, notice the repeated phrase in verses 15 and 16. Look for the repetition. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, his officials, and the chief men of the land he took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor. Did you catch it? To Babylon. That's where they're headed, repeated 3 times in those verses. The story of exile is the story of unspeakable loss and pain. It's the pain of national tragedy, the loss of religious identity, the loss of any semblance of safety or freedom. It's the story of the loss of home, but not just their physical home. Look at verse 20 with me. For because of the anger of the Lord, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he cast them out from his presence. They lost their spiritual home, their true home. This is the story of exile. And like any good story, it leads to lots of questions. What did they feel? Sadness, grief, fear, confusion, anger, anxiety. I bet they felt hopelessness. What did they feel? Then maybe a second question of exile is, why did it happen? Why? On one level, the story points to a ruthless and power-hungry king. Nebuchadnezzar, maybe that's the reason that it happened. And if you want to know the most dominant phrase that gets repeated in our passage, it's the phrase, the king of Babylon. That's where the real emphasis is. 7 times, in fact. 7 times, verse 10, verse 11, twice in verse 12, verse 16, verse 17, and verse 20. 7 in the Bible is the number for perfection or completeness. This might lead you to think the story of exile is written in response to a perfectly powerful and sinful leader, namely Nebuchadnezzar. But just before the passage we read, a little earlier, 2 Kings 24, verses 1 through 4, those verses provide some important details to fill out our story. Let me read 2 Kings 24, verses 1 through 4. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim, that's Jehoiachin's dad. I know the names are confusing. I'll do my best, but that's the guy's dad that got carried into Babylon. He became his servants. That's Jehoiakim became the servant of Nebuchadnezzar for 3 years. He paid taxes to him. He says, we can exist as a state as long as we flow some tax revenue to you, Nebuchadnezzar, right? And Nebuchadnezzar says, okay. But then he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans. Chaldeans is just another word for Babylonians. Bands of Chaldeans or Babylonians, and bands of Syrians, and bands of Moabites, and bands of Ammonites, and he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord that he had written by his servants, the prophets. Surely this came upon Judah at the command of the Lord, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done, and also for the innocent blood that he had shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood. And the Lord would not pardon. Surely it is at the hand of the Lord that this is happening, says the author of 2 Kings. You see, the real story, the story behind the story, is the Lord, the true King of Judah. It is him who is at work through the king of Babylon. The King of Kings is empowering, even perfecting, the power of the king of Babylon. If Zedekiah at the end of our passage is a puppet for Nebuchadnezzar, then Nebuchadnezzar is nothing more than a puppet for the Lord. The story of exile is written not in response to a potently sinful leader, but in response to a potently sinful people. While we'll examine the other causes of exile, that's our next series in 2 weeks. If you want to grab that booklet, we'll be talking about the causes of exile. We'll look at those causes in more depth in the reading plan that Rich mentioned. But the clearest cause, the overarching cause of exile is human sinfulness, selfishness, and idol worship. Idol worship is trusting in anything that is not God for that which only God can provide. They ended up hopeless because they placed their hope in the wrong thing. And exile is the moment God releases his people to live in the manner they desire to live. You want to live apart from my wisdom? You want to live apart from my presence? Then exile is the void into which you must be carried. Jehoiachin is carried away to Babylon. But the story of exile is not simply the tragic tale of Jerusalem and its citizens, beginning in 598 BC. The story of exile is the story of all our lives. Come back to the Christmas breakfast table with me for a moment. There's a little truth behind every joke. What's the truth behind Sophia's joke? I don't always get everything I want. Someone has it better than me. The fourth child gets away with things the firstborn child could never get away with. The good life is out there somewhere. yet it keeps eluding me. Though I'm at home, on the best day of the year to be home, there's something that doesn't feel quite like home. The story of exile is the story of all our lives. Exile is the dominant experience of humanity. We are not at home, and we all feel it. We feel it when we work, wondering if we were made to do more. We feel it in our relationships, asking, why is this always a struggle? We feel it in marriage, longing to be more fully loved and understood. We feel it in singleness. Where is the person created just for me? We feel it in our communities, thinking somewhere things must function better than here. We feel it at school, thinking somewhere out there, I know I'd feel like I belonged. We feel it in our politics. The problems are clear. It's the solutions that evade us. The story of exile is the story of all our lives. What feels like another lifetime ago at this point, I used to teach English. And I love the way different authors open their books, open their works. It always sets the trajectory and the main theme. I think my favorite opening line in all of literature comes from the Divine Comedy by Dante. He wrote this: midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. Notice Dante doesn't say, midway through the journey of my life, I got lost in a dark forest. He's making a claim to something a bit more universal. Midway upon the journey of our life, somewhere along the way, we all get lost. Dante lived in the late 1200s, early 1300s. Why does the opening of a book written 700 years ago plus still resonate with us today? 700 years ago, quite different time, still hits. Because the story of exile is the story of all our lives. Identify the place this morning in your life where you most profoundly experience exile. Where do you feel it most deeply? Now, if you're willing, if you have the courage, start asking yourself the same questions of exile. What do you feel? Sadness, grief, fear, confusion, anger, anxiety, hopelessness. And to that list, I've added frustration, lost, misunderstood, unknown. As many of our small groups restart for the fall, this would be a great question to ask in your small group, to share, to get honest with each other, to become vulnerable and transparent with each other. What do you feel in your place of exile? And the second question, potentially even more dangerous: why does it happen? It's our sinfulness, our selfishness, our idol worship, again, that is trusting in anything that is not God for that which only God can provide. And we'll nuance that just a touch in the next series, because I know some people feel exile because of the sinfulness of others, abuse they've suffered, abandonment that they have been left, and they have been left alone, adultery, addiction, We'll talk about that in the next series. But for now, let's focus on what's reported in the Bible as the main cause of our exile, which is our sinfulness, selfishness, and idol worship. The other day, I went to the grocery store. We live close to a grocery store, which is a great thing in my book. I can walk to the grocery store, and I did, because August is peach season. And I wanted to see if they had any ripe peaches at the grocery store. And so I stole away from the house. I walked to the grocery store. I found the bin of peaches. I sifted through them, and I found one that I believed was perfectly ripe. And I bought it. And I walked home. And I placed it on the counter. I have a little spot on the counter. It's not recognized by everyone in my family, but I am making a territorial claim to this one spot on the corner of the kitchen counter. It's my readiness spot. Something that I need for my next moment out the door. Again, it's not always recognized. Other people are always trying to colonize that spot, but that's my spot in my own imagination. And I placed the peach there because for my next meal, I want to end the meal not with ice cream made by man, but the sweetness of a peach made by the good Lord, because that is the only way that these things could taste this good. They're so good at the peak of freshness and ripeness in August. Nina comes into the kitchen. She says, "Did you just go to the grocery store?" I said, yes, I did. She said, "Is that all you bought?" I said, "Yes, I bought this one peach." She said, "Do you realize you live in a house with 5 other people that also might want to eat?" And I thought, ooh, yeah. How am I gonna get out of this? And she's very perplexed. She goes, "You really went to the store?" And she drove it home. "You really went to the store and you bought one peach. For who? For yourself? That's what you thought was a good idea?" So again, selfishness. I went to a whole nother gear of it. And I said, "Nina, you do such a good job taking care of things. I thought if I just took care of myself, that'd be one less thing for you to take care of." How's that? I hear the groans. You can ask Nina after the second service. I did attempt to spin my way out of the one peach incident of 2024, as it's now called, in my house. Nina promptly took the peach and put it in the communal fruit basket for anyone who wanted it. But you see, the one peach incident of 2024, it's only the tippy top of the iceberg of my own selfishness. Something deeper lurks below. In Genesis chapter 3, the first man and the first woman decided to live life according to their wisdom rather than God's wisdom. They chose a self-centered rather than God-centered life. And here's the result from Genesis 3:23. "Therefore, the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden." The first man, the first woman, the first exile. Coming back to our story in 2 Kings. "For because of the anger of the Lord, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he cast them out from his presence." I've underlined the word out. Ooh, I did it in my document, not up there. But look in the word out in both passages. The word out, it's the same Hebrew word from both passages. The author of 2 Kings is bringing you back to the book of Genesis, and he's saying the exile of 2 Kings, it's just a repeat. It's the same thing as the exile in Genesis. Why? Because we've all chosen to live according to our wisdom rather than God's wisdom. We've all chosen a self-centered rather than God-centered life. Last week we had a guest speaker from the Virginia Beach Community Chapel. His name was Rob Esperat. And he had a fantastic quote about this that I went back and transcribed. I'll try to do it as well as he did it. Ever since mankind was banished from the garden, humanity has been haunted by an aching in our soul. We can call it a thirst for significance. We can call it a need for self-actualization. We can call it the summit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can call it whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, what it really is, at its core, is an aching need to be allowed back into the garden. Home. That's it. That's at the center of all our lives, this longing for home. That's why the story of exile is the story of all our lives. Now, I hope there is at least some small comfort in knowing the Bible understands and explains our sense of exile. I read this 2 Kings passage, which I'm sure was all on your reading list this week. Everyone was going to 2 Kings 24. I know it's a very popular section of the Bible. But I read 2 Kings 24 and I say to myself, finally, a book that explains rather than explains away our experience in the world. The Bible refuses to diminish our sense of exile or offer some trite advice about our feeling of exile getting vanquished by finding a few new supplements or by developing some new atomic habits, as is all the rage these days. But I have even better news than the Bible explaining our sense of exile. The Bible answers the most important question of exile. How do I get home? Now, before we turn to the Bible's answer, I want to be very clear. I think the Bible is telling us the truth we would never tell ourselves in this moment. The truth is, there is no house you can buy, no trip you can take. There's no person you can marry, no sex you can have, no job you can get, no money you can make, no beverage you can drink, no championship you can win, no weight you can lose. There's no identity you can create, and no politician you can elect that will make you feel home. There's only a person you can follow. We just finished a study on the Gospel of Mark. In Mark's Gospel, he begins by telling you that Jesus is the true King. And after he tells you that Jesus is the true King, he writes this: the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. It's a quote from the prophet Isaiah. It's a vision Isaiah had for the exiles, that they would be sent out into a foreign land, but one day, a voice would cry out in the middle of the desert and would say, God is coming. God is making a way in the wilderness. Prepare the path. God will lead you through the wilderness, out of your exile, into your true home. Isaiah saw it. And Mark says it's here in Jesus Christ. In and as Jesus Christ, God entered into our exile to prepare the way home. See, Jesus lived as an exile. He said, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Jesus died as an exile. At the end of the Gospel of John, we read that Jesus carried his cross out of the city. Jehoiachin, the 10,000 captives, they're taken out of Jerusalem. Jesus carries the cross out of the city to the place called the skull. And on the cross, Jesus endured the worst aspects of human exile: darkness, insults, unfathomable pain, a sense of separation from God, and death. It's Jesus that was cast out so that we might be brought in. His resurrection then is the proof that the pain of exile will not have the last word. The sin that caused the exile has been overcome. The highway home has been completed. Follow me, Jesus says. Trust me. Believe in me. Jehoiachin was carried away to the kingdom of Babylon. Jesus Christ stands ready to carry you right now back to the kingdom of God. The story of exile is the story of all our lives. There's no house you can buy. There's no trip you can take. There's no championship you can win. There's no identity you can create. There's only a person you can follow. Will you make a decision right now to place your faith, your trust in Jesus Christ? The invitation is to follow the ultimate exile, and he will lead you to the ultimate home.
Thank you for joining us today. Here at the Williamsburg Community Chapel, we are all about making disciples of Jesus Christ. So wherever you are on your spiritual journey, we hope you will join us this year as we study the biblical theme of exile and learn how to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land.